Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. I'm your host for the next hour. My name is Tom Fress, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Thanks for tuning in this morning. And we will continue now with our reading and discussion of the book, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney. And you may get a copy of this book, and I highly recommend it, Roman and Littlefield. We're currently discussing, a global inquisition, part 1 and part 2 of the global inquisition, World War I and World War II. It was, payback time for the Protestant Reformation. It was payback time against the heretics who had rebelled against the Roman Catholic Church, both the Protestants and the Orthodox. And it was also retribution against the Jews who brought us the oracles of God. Roman Catholicism has a doctrine called replacement theology, that the Jews who crucified Christ, according to the Roman Catholic Church, no longer are God's people, and that baton was passed to the Roman Catholic Church, and now they are God's holy people. And we're all heretics. The Roman Catholic Church teaches, as a matter of Roman Catholic canon law, that if you're outside the church, if you do not have the Roman Catholic Church as mother, you do not have God as father. And that if you are outside the communion of the Roman Catholic Church, salvation is unobtainable for you. And it was the Protestants and the Orthodox that Rome blamed for the overthrow of papal tyranny prior and up to the First and Second World Wars. And the First and Second World Wars, with the cooperation of the governments of the world, and no more so than the United States of America, punished those people. German Protestants, Balkan Orthodox, and European Jews. As a matter of fact, the papacy was literally throwing a temper tantrum. It was striking out against all of its historic enemies. And Christ, being one of them, Rome launched her inquisition against Protestant Germany. I know you've never read such a thing in a history book, but the history books are designed to protect the papacy as the Antichrist and to deceive the whole world. And we're led to believe that political things happen as a matter of course or a matter of a circumstance. But history is literally fulfillment of Bible prophecy. The Bible tells us ahead of time what is going to happen. Now, this man of war, this man of sin, is going to deceive the whole world and kill the saints. And this is how it takes place. This is the First and Second World War. And the First World War, the First Inquisition, was simply a stepping stone for the Second World War, the Second Inquisition. It's all the same fight. As a matter of fact, the author even slightly acknowledges this. In the title of this particular chapter, he says, The World at War, Part 1. Okay, that's Part 1 of a two-part war. World War I was simply the beginning of the Second World War. World War I virtually led to the Second World War. World War I utterly guaranteed that there would be a World War II. And I believe the author's title even acknowledges this fact. Now, we'll continue where we left off, backing up just a paragraph for continuity purposes. If you're following along, we're in the middle of the page 79. He says, after the war, the Holy See was excluded from the peace talks in Paris as per Article 15 of the Treaty of London. Now, I think I explained this to you last time. Rome was tactfully excluded from the discussions because everybody else was doing the papacy's bidding, and the papacy had to appear to be the peacemaker in the world. Remember, this is Rome's crusade. This is Rome's inquisition. What is being achieved in the world through the First World War and the Second World War were literally the agenda of the popes. And, of course, if the world knew that, then the world would never describe the papacy as a peacemaker. He would be known for what he is, a war maker, the destroyer, the deceiver. But Rome, tactfully, was excluded, strategically was excluded from the peace talks. Why? Because the Jesuits were representing the official Vatican policy. And they were the ones who sat at the peace table, and they were the ones who determined the terms of the peace so that there would guaranteed be a Second World War. Okay, the papacy stood publicly and said, we want war without victory. Okay, neither side should win this war. Neither side should oppress the other. Everyone should return to the status quo antebellum, that is, the status quo prior to the conflict, and there would be no victors and no vanquished in the war. That's what was said publicly by the Vatican. And that's what Woodrow Wilson said publicly. But they were simply deceiving the world. This was their crusade. And so to remain aloof and disconnected from these peace talks, well, left the Pope in his pious throne as a peacemaker, when in fact it was his crusade all along. Now, as suggested by a letter dated April 3rd, 1918, and preserved in the Vatican's archives, from the British Foreign Secretary Arthur James Balfour to Cardinal James Gibbons of Baltimore, some of the Allies regretted the Holy See's exclusion. Now, this is all theater. Don't forget, this is all theater. Quote, I can assure you that I personally would gladly see the clause, that is, the clause of the Treaty of London that excluded the papacy from the peace discussions. He said, I personally would gladly see the clause eliminated or profoundly modified, not only for the cogent reasons given by Your Eminence, speaking of James Cardinal Gibbons of Baltimore, but also on the merits of the case. Your Eminence will, however, realize that it is a matter of great delicacy for us to take further action in this direction at present. In other words, I've expressed to you my personal distaste that the Pope isn't included in the discussions, but we know this is a very delicate situation. We better not talk about it much more, because they might let the cat out of the bag. Okay? That's what that's all about. This was the Pope's war. He won it against all defenders. The Pope was the gainer in the end, and he should set the terms of the peace. But if he did that, he would lose all respect in the world as a peacemaker. That's a delicate matter. We must not take further action in this direction, or the papacy will be outed. We'll handle the discussions, the peace discussions, for him. Now, does it make sense what he wrote? Now, the author continues, he said, would the presence of the Holy See at Versailles have changed the outcome of that treaty? Might its voice have muted the vengeance of the Allies as they named their terms for the defeated Central Powers? All we know for certain is that when the Allies met in Paris, they went for Germany's jugular. They went for Germany's jugular. In other words, in the terms of the peace, Germany was so unfairly handled that it virtually guaranteed that Germany would go to war again. Okay? And it appeared, just as the Pope publicly predicted, that if there is a victor and a vanquished in this war, it will lead to another war. See, they made the Pope out to be a prophet in this matter, when it was intended from the very beginning that there be a two-stage war. World War I, the terms of the peace would guarantee a second world war. And that's precisely what it is. And here this author, in most of the world, believes that the Pope, Benedict XV, was literally a prophet in this matter and predicted that if there was a victor and a vanquished of this war, there would be a second world war. It simply should tell you that papacy was writing the script for both wars. The Jesuits fomented both wars. They knew which direction the war was going to go. The papacy was simply calling the outcome before it happened to put himself up in a position of a prophet when he was directing the whole thing. The Jesuits were directing the whole thing. He says they demanded onerous reparations of 132 gold marks, the equivalent of $323 billion in present dollar value, while seizing $7 billion in foreign assets. Germany was forced to surrender 13% of the territory it possessed before the war, and its army and navy were reduced to shadow forces. So they so bitterly punished and wreaked their vengeance on Germany at the Paris Peace Treaty, at the Paris Peace Talks, that it virtually guaranteed that Germany, in order to survive, was going to have to go to war again. This is basically exactly what Pope Benedict XV predicted. He was no prophet. He was the orchestrator of the war. He was the orchestrator of the peace talks. While he was stylishly absent from the peace talks, the kings of the earth who do his bidding made sure the terms of that peace were so lopsided against Germany that Germany would, well, if you'll permit me, fulfill the Pope's prophecy for a second world war. Isn't this just so predictable of the papacy? Once you realize what the papacy represents in Bible prophecy and in history. The Bible predicts this man of sin. He's a warmonger. He's not a peacemaker. Not at all. He only appears to be a peacemaker. Look, if Satan's going to deceive, he has to lie, doesn't he? And if Satan's man, the papacy, is going to deceive, he has to lie, doesn't he? And that's what he's doing. He says, as Pope Benedict XV foresaw, here's this author acknowledging Pope Benedict XV as a prophet. As Pope Benedict XV foresaw, such terms were a recipe for insolvency for Germany. In other words, they couldn't financially continue under these terms of the peace. It was a recipe for insolvency and bitterness, and Germany soon fell into ruin. So Protestant Germany, the very seat of the Protestant Reformation, is wallowing in debt and disdain and has been vanquished. The people of Germany have been humiliated. Payback time for Protestant Germany. And it says, when it rose again, that is, when Germany rose again, the nation was a monster. See, Benedict XV was a prophet, wasn't he? So says this author. And he says the Pope, it turned out, had been right. Okay? So there you have it. This is a divine institution, this papacy. And Pope Benedict XV is portrayed by this author of being a prophet, when in fact he was calling all the shots. And he was doing it through mouths like Woodrow Wilson, President of the United States of America. The first beast meets the second beast. The second beast does the bidding of the first beast. The second beast, the wilderness beast, that which rose up in the wilderness, that is the depopulated or sparsely populated West, that is specifically the United States of America, causes the whole world to worship the first beast. Revelation chapter 13. Fulfilled in history. You know, my Uncle Bob used to ask me, he says, Tom, I cannot find any evidence of the United States being spoken of anywhere in Scripture or prophecy. And I said, well, Uncle Bob, it's got to be there. A nation so big and so powerful had to be acknowledged in the Scriptures somewhere. And he says, well, I can't find it. And I said, well, it's because we're looking in the wrong place. And he said, you know, I've come to the conclusion, since the United States is not found anywhere in Scripture, that, well, it's such a Christian nation, it's probably going to be raptured out. And I looked him right in the eye and I told him, Uncle Bob, a warmongering nation like the United States that kills its babies to the tunes of millions is not going to be raptured out. And it wasn't long before God opened my eyes to where the United States of America is recorded in the Scripture. It's Revelation chapter 13. It speaks of two beasts, one that rises up out of the sea, and then subsequently a second beast rises up out of the wilderness. And after I studied the history of the United States, God directed me through my studies of the history of the United States, the Scripture and history have confirmed to me my greatest fear, that the United States is indeed specifically made reference to in the Bible, in prophecy. And it's not good news. It's not good news. The author concludes the chapter by saying, an interesting and somewhat ironic coda, Wilson made a point of visiting Benedict, that is, President Woodrow Wilson, a pretended Protestant, seemingly opposed to the Roman Catholic Church, or at least in deference to the Protestants that lived in this country at the time of his life. Woodrow Wilson made a point of visiting Pope Benedict XV when he came to Europe for the peace talks in January of 1919. The second sitting American president to travel outside the country, that is, President Theodore Roosevelt, had visited the construction of the Panama Canal in 1906, Wilson being only the second president to leave the country. He also became the first president of the United States to meet a pope. The second beast visits the first beast. Okay? And it says there is no record that Wilson ever regretted missing the opportunity to work with the Pope for the peace or the Pope's exclusion from Versailles. But Wilson took a political risk in going to the Vatican at a time when the United States was still fairly anti-Catholic. In other words, Protestant. He must have believed that meeting Benedict was worth it. What do you suppose? Do you suppose what do you suppose happened behind closed doors when Woodrow Wilson met his arch prototype in the Vatican? High fives? Of course, they weren't popular back then, but you can better believe that there was a private party that went on between the first beast of Revelation 13 and the second beast. It's a wonder the papacy didn't canonize Woodrow Wilson, make him a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. But that would have inflamed the Protestants in this, well, very sleepy Protestant nation. Anyway, he continues, 3 years later, Benedict XV was dead, and Woodrow Wilson was an invalid, felled by a massive stroke. Neither lived to see his predictions or admonitions come to pass. Wilson's dream for a League of Nations, that is a global government, headed up by the papacy, Wilson's dream for a League of Nations remained unrealized, but his vision of America's role in the world, think the second beast, America's role in the world is prophetic. It's the second beast. It causes the whole world to worship the first beast. Wilson's dream for a League of Nations remained unrealized, but his vision of America's role in the world as a moral force, that is, an antichrist force, would guide American foreign policy for the next century. Benedict XV, after serving just 7 years as Pope, would quickly fade into history, but the papacy, that is the seat of Antichrist, I will add, but the papacy would continue to be more actively engaged with the world because of his work. The bar for future popes as peacemakers would be higher the next time war came, and it came sooner and brought far more devastation than anyone in 1919 could have envisioned. Let me tell you who envisioned it. The papacy, who fomented it. The Jesuits, who made it happen. With the help of the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, and successors. Now we're going to go into Act 1 of this global inquisition. Chapter 7 is entitled The World at War, Part 2. It begins with a quote from Antichrist Pope Pius XI. This is dated 1939. Quote, "Gone are the proud illusions of limitless progress. Should any still fail to grasp this fact, the tragic situation of today would rouse them with the prophet's cry, quote, 'Hear, ye deaf and ye blind, behold,' unquote." What do you suppose Antichrist Pope Pius XI was talking about? Limitless progress. Just another name for Protestantism. Just another name for that movement of God that finally revealed to the world through the Protestant Reformation who the Antichrist of the Bible is. The papacy was going to limit that progress. It's called the Council of Trent, Jesuit-inspired Counter-reformation. That's what World War I was. That's what World War II was. And we'll be back with more of the reading of the book, The Global Vatican, by former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, Francis Rooney, when we continue here on Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
If you'd like to get a copy of this program, you may subscribe at FirstAmendmentRadio.com for only $45 a month, and you'll receive an MP3 CD weekly of all of our programs. As a bonus, we'll send you a password for our audio archives online. That's a $15 value. Or you may request any month of any program on one MP3 CD for a minimum donation of only $25, or any single program on tape, MP3 CD, or CD for only $15. You may do all of this online at FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Just follow the instructions to make a donation or subscribe. You may also adopt an hour of your favorite program. Please don't forget that most of the programs on FirstAmendmentRadio.com are listener-supported. Don't do internet? Then call 559-781-3773 and we'll be honored to help you. Thank you from all of us here at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to hear Inquisition Update continue on First Amendment Radio, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors the program. And we thank again Brother Nicholas for seeing the value of this Protestant program. Now, just to make it clear, I don't want to be misunderstood. World War I and World War II were Vatican strategies to overthrow the Protestant Reformation, among other things, but primarily it was Act 1 and Act 2 of the opening scene of the Counter-reformation. The Jesuit-led Counter-reformation spawned at the Council of Trent in 1560-something. Just 40, 50 years after the Protestant Reformation, when Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses on the door of the Wittenberg Church and proclaimed the Pope to be the Antichrist, he burned the papal bull that condemned him and excommunicated him, and he also burnt the Roman Catholic canon law. He was a canon lawyer. He was a professor at the university. He was Roman Catholic. He was a monk for the Roman Catholic Church. And simply by reading the scriptures for himself in his own language and then translating those scriptures into German so that the German people could read it for themselves, they discovered mutually that the papacy was none other than the Antichrist of the Bible. And that it was a system of works. It was the satanic church. It was not the church of Jesus Christ, but the church of Antichrist. And because of that exposure to the world, and because the Protestant Reformation liberated most of the subjects of the papal subjects of Europe, because of Martin Luther's discovery, the papacy is in a fit of rage. And that's when the Jesuit order was created. The purpose of that order, an order of religious monks, warrior monks, swearing an oath, a most diabolical oath. If you haven't yet read The Extreme Oath of the Jesuits, I implore you, just Google the term, The Extreme Oath of the Jesuits, and read it for yourself. They were an order of monks that were established by the Roman Catholic Church to conquer the world for the Pope and to destroy Protestantism. And by the destruction of Protestantism could regain the world for the Pope and regain all that the Pope lost and then some. Not only to restore all of the subjects that were lost and the nations that were lost to Protestantism, but to restore all those nations and then gain the rest of the world for the papacy. To cause the whole world to worship the first beast. That's what the Jesuit mission is. Or they cease to be Jesuits. World War I and World War II were simply a product of the mission that was given to the Jesuits to conquer the Protestant Reformation. And none of us need be surprised that war against Protestantism began in the very seat of Protestantism, as recorded in history, Martin Luther's Germany. Now, at the terms of the peace talks, the Paris peace talks after World War I, were so punitive to Germany that it virtually guaranteed that Germany, in order to survive, was going to have to militarize and defend itself. And through that effort, the papacy could continue the inquisition against the quote-unquote heretics, Protestants, Jews, and Orthodox. Now we'll begin reading the chapter. If you're following along in your book, page 81, it says, "The crowd began gathering on the cold evening of February 11th, 1922. By the following morning, more than 200,000 people stood under the warming sun in St. Peter's Square to await the appearance of the new Pope. At last, high above the square, the windows of the Basilica's central loggia opened, and onto the balcony stepped Pope Pius XI. He raised his hands and blessed the people below with the Urbi et Orbi." That is a special Latin rigmarole the Pope does to literally proclaim himself the king of the earth. Okay? Now it says the crowd burst into cheers. This was the first time a pope had given a post-election blessing in front of St. Peter's since Pope Pius IX in 1846. It was a sign that Pius XI intended to engage the world beyond the Vatican walls. Do you buy this? Did you hear the subtle lie? It's the first time since Pope Pius IX that the Vatican intends to engage the world from beyond the Vatican walls. The papacy was behind World War I and World War II. The papacy never, it pretended on its face publicly to become a prisoner within the Vatican and completely aloof from the world. But it was not aloof from the world. It was dictating global policy. Okay, he only appeared to be dead. All right? Pope Pius XI shared an outward-looking vision of the papacy with Benedict XV, but in personal appearance he was a distinct contrast to his predecessor. Though a scholar and former prefect of the Vatican Library, Pius XI, formerly known by his given name Achille Ratti, was no egghead. He was a robust, barrel-chested athlete. Earlier in life, he had achieved renown as an alpinist, having conquered some of the Alps' most challenging peaks, including the Matterhorn and Mont Blanc. Years later, another mountain climber, John Paul II, would follow in Pope Pius XI's footsteps into the Vatican. He exuded strength, physical self-possession, and authority. After meeting Pius XI, Hermann Göring, Adolf Hitler's infamous henchman, would remark, quote, "For the first time in my life, I believe I was afraid," unquote. Can you imagine this author including a quote like that? He admits that Hermann Göring, Adolf Hitler's famous henchman, would say this, quote, "In seeing Achille Ratti," that is, Pope Pius XI, for the first time, he said, "For the first time in my life, I believe I was afraid," unquote. You suppose Hermann Göring knew something that Protestants are loath to admit to themselves? He says that that February day, as Pius gave his blessing from above the square, another soon-to-be infamous fascist stood in the crowd below, impressed by the scene before him. Quote, "Look at this multitude of every nation. How is it that the politicians who govern the nations do not realize the immense value of this international force, this universal spiritual power?" Unquote. I've simply got to ask my listeners. Let me read this gobbledygook again. This is Benito Mussolini, okay? The fascist, second only to Adolf Hitler himself, the great crusader for the Roman Catholic Church. Listen to what he says. In public, obviously. In private, it'd be completely different. But here's what he said in public. Quote, "Look at this multitude of every nation. How is it that the politicians who govern the nations do not realize the immense value of this international force, this universal spiritual power?" That's what he was saying about Pope Pius XI. Let me tell you something. Just like Adolf Hitler and Francisco Franco of Spain, Mussolini would never have come to power were he not a puppet of the Vatican. And he proclaimed in this quote exactly how he viewed the Vatican, and then implied, how is it that the politicians who govern the nations do not realize the immense value of this international force, this papacy, this universal spiritual power? Fact of the matter is, the governments of the world worship him, or your Bible is a liar. He says he reigns over the kings of the earth. He reigned over Benito Mussolini. He reigned over Hermann Göring. He reigned over Adolf Hitler. He reigned over Francisco Franco. He reigned over Woodrow Wilson. He reigneth over the kings of the earth. Bible prophecy fulfilled. It's evident in history. You know, I had a discussion with a listener the other day. Actually, an email exchange. And she reported to me that in her church, history is never discussed. It's just not part of their discussion. As a matter of fact, the pastor of the church resisted any discussion of history as a waste of time. Well, look, here's something we all have to understand. Bible prophecy is God revealing history in advance, telling us aforetime what will happen in the future. That's what Bible prophecy is. Now, if we are Bible believers, we read the Bible is most important to us. We go to church to read the scriptures and read the Bible. We're certainly going to spend some time reading prophecy because the Bible is a book of prophecy. And common sense, common reason, that which is available to a dandelion, understands that if you're going to study Bible prophecy, you must also study history. Otherwise, you can never discover when a Bible prophecy's been fulfilled or how it was fulfilled. If one is to read Bible prophecy without any study whatsoever in history, he'd just as well be reading Moby Dick. It's just for entertainment. There's nothing to be learned. And is that why so many churches spend so little time in Bible prophecy? And especially in the book of Daniel, and especially in the book of Revelation, two books that are so interconnected as to have the same author, and they virtually were the same author, Jesus Christ the righteous. But you can't see the fulfillment. You can't even understand those prophecies with a surety unless you see their fulfillment in history. And the greatest example of the ignorance of this world is that they fail to recognize in history the fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy in Daniel chapter 9 called the 70 weeks of Daniel. And it's because their lack of study of history, they fail to realize that Jesus was the fulfillment of Daniel's 70th week 2,000 years ago. And because they are so bereft of history, so bereft of understanding, it's easy to sell a futurist lie. And the cockamamie idea that the 70th week did not immediately follow the 69th week and that it wasn't fulfilled 2,000 years ago but will be fulfilled sometime in the future. And it's not Jesus Christ who caused the sacrifices and oblations to cease by giving up his own life, God confirming by ripping the veil of the temple and virtually stopping any more animal sacrifices. No, it's going to be some future Antichrist, some demon. He's going to have, a red forked tail and fire coming out of his mouth, and he's going to look a lot like Mitt Romney, graying temples, tall, dark, and handsome, real dark eyes. He's going to be a sinister guy. Everybody's going to recognize him as the Antichrist because you know what? He's going to sign a peace treaty with the Jews, and after 7 years, he's going to cause the sacrifice and oblations to cease, and you just gobble that right up because you didn't study history, because your pastor forbid you to study history. Your pastor, just glossed over Daniel's 70-week prophecy and didn't even talk about Revelation. It's just beyond your comprehension, right? We're not going to sit here in church and argue endlessly about Bible prophecies that we can't understand. Never mind that we're never going to understand them because we never study history. Because Bible prophecy is simply history foretold. If you're going to study the Bible prophecy in one hand, you must, in the other hand, have a history book with accurate history written therein. Otherwise, you cannot confirm or deny that any Bible prophecy has been fulfilled. And yet, this is the logic that is dictated to the people from the pulpits of our churches today. Well, we're reading a very important history book right here. The Global Vatican. and it confirms to us from history God's prophecies being fulfilled. And because we have the Bible in our hand and this history book in the other hand, we have no doubt who the Antichrist is. Who he is, who he was, and who he always will be. The Antichrist of the Bible is the papacy. Now, through Mussolini, he's going to punish some more heretics. But Mussolini acknowledges this universal spiritual power that the politicians of the world must simply recognize, as though they didn't already, as though he didn't already, as though Woodrow Wilson didn't already, as though Adolf Hitler didn't already, as if the kings of the earth never have understood this international force, this universal spiritual power of the papacy, when the Bible plainly tells you he reigneth over the kings of the earth. What are we going to believe? We going to believe the Bible? We going to believe Mussolini? More public bluster from another man of sin, solidly in the pocket of the Pope, just like all of them are. Now he says the observer was Benito Mussolini. Later that year, Mussolini would lead a march of fascists into Rome and oversee a coup to install himself as Prime Minister of Italy. That's right, we've got to have a papist in charge. We have to have a papist in charge of Italy. And all the while styling himself an atheist. And the world bought it. He says, an avowed atheist, Mussolini was no friend of the Catholic Church. Yuck, yuck. Okay, you buy that one? I got a bridge on the moon. Nobody's bought it yet. He says, an avowed atheist, Mussolini was no friend of the Catholic Church, but like Napoleon, he understood its power and influence as the ultimate soft power. Okay, if you're going to be a king of this earth, whether you accept the Pope or not, you have to acknowledge him. You have to coddle up to him. You have to obey him because he controls so many people in the world. He says he understood, too, how a personal relationship with the church could create the illusion, if only temporarily, that he was more than a dictator. Yeah, if Mussolini was going to be anybody, he had to be a close relationship with the papacy. Because that's where all real power comes from in this world. If you're going to be a force to be reckoned with in this world, you have to have a relationship with the Antichrist of the Bible. You got to go along to get along with the Pope. You don't rise to power in this world. You don't maintain power in this world by spitting in the face of the Pope. You got to kiss his behind. And Mussolini kissed his behind and his ring. And it says, and so it was Mussolini at the height of his power, the self-proclaimed Il Duce, who put an end to lingering issues of the 1870s, including the loss of the Papal States and the 59-year quote-unquote imprisonment of the popes in the Vatican. Remember, the popes, having been rejected, having been defeated by the Protestant Reformation, having been defeated by the French Enlightenment, just shut themselves up in the Vatican and just closed out the world while they were running the whole stinking show. Says the series of agreements between Mussolini's government and the church, that is the Roman Catholic Church, signed on February 11th, 1929, that is the Lateran Accords, February 11th, 1929, 7 years after Pope Pius XI's installation, is known collectively as the Lateran Treaty. Another treaty with the Antichrist. An Italian treaty with the Antichrist. The Lateran Treaty. He says the treaty granted the Holy See a small piece of land behind the Leonine walls that the church occupied for centuries. We're talking about Vatican City. 109 acres. That's the Pope's sovereign domain, so to speak. It says at 109 acres, approximately the size of an 18-hole golf course, the parcel bore little resemblance to the significant lands the church once held as the Papal States. More important than the size, though, was the meaning. Once again, the church held temporal property to accompany its recognized international sovereignty, ruled by the Pope and legally independent from external powers. That's right. The papacy must maintain its independence from any external source, including the throne of Almighty God. Roman Catholic canon law stipulates that the Pope is the judge of every man, and no man may judge him. And as I stated earlier, that's why the World Court won't take on the pedophile priests, the global pedophile priests. They've stated publicly, we don't have jurisdiction over the Pope and his priests. There is no earthly power unto which the Vatican is subject. And the papacy even claims not to be subject to the powers of heaven. The Vatican suggests that the papacy is the power and authority of heaven on the earth. And that's how he justifies his independence and sovereignty in the world. King of kings and Lord of lords. Roman Catholic canon law demands it. Bible prophecy demands it. History confirms it. He says, according to Article 24 of the Lateran Treaty, Vatican City was, quote, always and in every case considered neutral and inviolable territory, unquote. Inviolable. Inviolable territory. Did you know every Roman Catholic church is an inviolable territory of the Pope? It isn't just Vatican City. That's why the illegal immigrants, as they are so erroneously called, they're Roman Catholic invaders from Mexico, helping the Jesuits to make America Catholic, fomenting the Jesuit-led Counter-reformation to destroy Protestantism by making America Catholic. The borders are wide open with Roman Catholic Mexico, Central and Southern South America, flooding into this country. Where do they find refuge? Why, in their mother asylum. Oh, excuse me. In their mother asylum. Their mother asylum, the Roman Catholic churches. That's the first place they go when they cross the line. That's where they get phony green papers. That's where they get their driver's licenses. That's where they get a job. And that's where they get hooked up with a gang. They're asylums. Have you ever heard, listen, I'm going to ask you a serious question. Have you ever heard the Immigration Service ever breaching the threshold of a Roman Catholic church to arrest quote-unquote illegal aliens? You never have and you never will. Every Roman Catholic church is a sanctuary, a sovereign, independent sanctuary, an extension of the Vatican. And the man of sin controls it. And nobody protests. Do you think you'd ever hear on the mainstream media somebody like, you know, you name them, one of the big talking heads on national television, informing the American people that every Roman Catholic church is a sanctuary for Roman Catholics, and that the civil power of this country is powerless to come in there and arrest those illegal aliens? Why, that might wake up a few Protestants, wouldn't it? Mainstream media is cooperating with it. That's why they call them illegal immigrants instead of Roman Catholic invaders to this Protestant land. They control the terms of all discussions. We have to correct that and call things what they really are. We'll continue tomorrow on Inquisition Update. Thanks for listening.